He was dining with his mistress, laughing like a king. Then his wife arrived holding hands with his biggest rival, and he froze. The lobster was still warm on his plate when his entire empire turned to ash. Dan Whitfield had spent 4 years convincing himself that his wife was beneath him. A pretty face he had collected like a trophy, then shoved into the corner of his penthouse to gather dust. Tonight he sat in the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, La Lumiere, feeding champagne-soaked strawberries to his mistress Jennifer, a 24-year-old social media influencer whose only talent was looking expensive. He thought he was untouchable. He thought Kate was at home, crying into her pillow like she did every night he didn't come home. He thought the world revolved around his $3.2 billion tech empire. But when the doors of La Lumiere swung open and the entire restaurant fell into a hushed reverence, Dan looked up, expecting to see a celebrity. What he saw instead made the blood drain from his face. It was Kate, his wife, the woman he had called plain and boring for 4 years. But she wasn't plain anymore. She was draped in a crimson Valentino gown that hugged every curve, diamonds glittering at her throat like frozen fire. And her hand, her delicate, familiar hand, was resting on the arm of Carlos Medina. Carlos Medina, the one man in the world Dan feared, the tech titan who had crushed 3 of Dan's acquisitions, the billionaire whose net worth made Dan's fortune look like pocket change, and he was looking at Kate like she was the only woman in the room. This is the story of how a billionaire lost everything at dinner, not because of a bad deal, but because he forgot that the woman he threw away was worth more than every dollar he ever made. 3 hours earlier, the Whitfield penthouse on Central Park West was drowning in silence. Kate stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her fingers tracing the dark circles under her eyes. She was 27 years old, but lately she felt ancient, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. Behind her, the bedroom was immaculate, a California king bed that she slept in alone most nights. Walk-in closets filled with designer clothes Dan had picked out. Modest cuts, muted colors, nothing that would draw attention. "You're not the star, Kate," he had told her once, early in their marriage. "You're the backdrop." She heard the front door open downstairs. Her heart didn't race anymore. It used to, back when she still believed he might come home and actually see her. Dan's voice echoed through the penthouse, sharp and irritated. "Kate! Kate, where the hell are you?" She walked out of the bedroom, down the floating staircase that Dan loved to show off to guests. He was standing in the foyer, still in his Tom Ford suit, checking his phone with one hand while loosening his tie with the other. "There you are," he said without looking up. "I need you to cancel dinner with the Hendersons tomorrow. Something came up." "What came up?" Kate asked quietly. Dan finally looked at her. His eyes did that thing they always did, scanned her like a document he was barely interested in reading. "Business. You wouldn't understand. I was a finance major, Dan. I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. And then you married me," Dan said, a smirk pulling at his lips. "So clearly you made the right choice. Look, just cancel it. Tell them I have a board meeting or something. Make it sound important." Kate felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "Where are you going tonight?" Dan pocketed his phone, already walking toward the home office. "La Lumiere? Investor dinner. Very exclusive. You'd be bored." "I could come with you." Dan stopped. He turned slowly, and the look on his face made Kate's stomach drop. It was the look he gave incompetent employees before he fired them. "Kate," he said, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone she had grown to despise. "La Lumiere has a dress code, and I don't mean the clothes. I mean the conversation. These are serious people, hedge fund managers, tech innovators. They don't want to hear about your book club or your yoga classes." "I don't have a book club." "Exactly my point. You don't have anything." Dan walked toward her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the one she used to love, the one that now made her nauseous. "Look, I know this isn't the fairy tale you imagine, but you have a good life, Kate. The penthouse, the credit cards, the Whitfield name. Most women would kill for what you have. Most women would want their husband to come home at night." Dan's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Was it guilt? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I'm building an empire," he said coldly. "Empires don't build themselves between 9 and 5. When I'm done, we'll have everything. You just need to be patient. I've been patient for 4 years, Dan. Then what's another few months? He checked his watch. I need to shower and change. Don't wait up. He walked past her, up the stairs, leaving Kate standing alone in the foyer of a penthouse that had never felt like home. La Lumiere was not just a restaurant. It was a temple of wealth, a cathedral where the ultra-rich came to worship themselves. The chandeliers were Venetian crystal, imported piece by piece from a palazzo in Italy. The tablecloths were Egyptian cotton. The wine list featured bottles that cost more than most people's annual salaries. And the clientele, senators, movie stars, Fortune 500 CEOs, were carefully curated by the owner, a Frenchman named Pierre, who treated reservations like papal audiences. Dan arrived at 8:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes late. He liked being late. It reminded people that his time was more valuable than theirs. Pierre greeted him at the entrance with a practiced smile. Mr. Whitfield, always a pleasure. Your usual table is ready, and your guest has already arrived. Dan nodded, straightening his jacket. He didn't bring Kate to La Lumiere. He had never brought Kate to La Lumiere. This was his space, his kingdom within a kingdom. He walked through the restaurant, nodding at familiar faces, a tech billionaire here, a media mogul there, until he reached the corner table, the best table, the one with the view of the entire room and the privacy of a confessional. Jennifer was already seated, scrolling through her phone with a champagne flute in hand. She looked up as Dan approached, her face breaking into that calculated smile he found so intoxicating. She was everything Kate wasn't: bold, loud, unapologetically hungry for the spotlight. Her dress was a silver slip that left little to the imagination, her blonde hair cascading in waves that probably took 2 hours to perfect. She had 2.3 million Instagram followers and a talent for making Dan feel like the most powerful man in any room. You're late, Jennifer pouted, but her eyes sparkled. She liked when he was late. It meant she got to make an entrance when he arrived. Traffic, Dan lied smoothly, sliding into the seat across from her. You look stunning. I know, Jennifer said, tilting her head so the light caught her new earrings. A gift from Dan, $47,000 worth of Cartier. I wore them for you. I noticed. Dan signaled for a waiter. Let's order. I'm starving. As the waiter approached, Jennifer leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. So, when are you going to leave her? Dan's hand paused on the menu. We talked about this, Jen. You talked. I listened. But it's been 8 months, Danny. 8 months of sneaking around, hiding in hotels, pretending I'm just your marketing consultant. She made air quotes, her manicured nails glinting. I'm not built for the shadows. I'm built for the spotlight. And you'll get it, Dan assured her, reaching across the table to take her hand. But divorcing Kate is complicated. There's prenup negotiations, asset divisions. My investors hate instability. If I file now, the stock could drop 15% overnight. So I'm supposed to wait until your stock is happy? You're supposed to wait until the time is right. Dan squeezed her hand. Trust me, by this time next year, you'll be Mrs. Whitfield, the only Mrs. Whitfield. Jennifer's pout softened. She loved when he talked about the future, when he painted pictures of the life they would have, the yacht in Monaco, the villa in Tuscany, the front row seats at Fashion Week. Fine, she relented, but I want the big ring, the one that makes people stare. Baby, when I propose, people won't just stare. They'll write articles about it. Jennifer laughed, bright and performative, just as the waiter returned. They ordered lobster for him, a salad she wouldn't finish for her, and settled into the comfortable rhythm of their affair. Dan told her about a competitor he was about to destroy. Jennifer told him about a brand deal that would make her famous. Neither of them noticed the shift in the room, the subtle turning of heads toward the entrance, the whispered conversations that died mid-sentence, the way Pierre, unflappable Pierre, suddenly looked nervous. It wasn't until the ambient jazz music seemed to fade into the background that Dan looked up and froze. The woman walking through La Lumiere's entrance was a vision in crimson. Her gown was Valentino. Dan recognized the cut, the way it hugged her waist before flowing like liquid fire to the floor. Her hair, usually pulled back in the simple ponytail he preferred, was down, cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. Diamond earrings caught the light with every step. A matching necklace rested against her collarbone, elegant and expensive. She moved like she owned the room. Like every eye on her was exactly where it belonged. Dan's brain short-circuited. That was Kate. His Kate. The woman he had left at home in yoga pants 3 hours ago. The woman who he told was too boring for places like this. The woman who hadn't worn anything but muted colors since their wedding. She was here, and she was radiant. But that wasn't what made Dan's heart stop. It was the man beside her. Carlos Medina walked with the easy confidence of someone who had never known scarcity. At 34, he had already built and sold 2 companies for over $1 billion each. His current venture, Medina Technologies, was valued at $28 billion and climbing. Forbes had called him the most dangerous man in tech because every market he entered, he dominated. He was also Dan's nemesis. 3 years ago, Carlos had outbid Dan for a promising AI startup. The acquisition had propelled Medina Technologies into the stratosphere while Dan's company stagnated. Then Carlos had poached Dan's best engineer. Then he had won a government contract that Dan had spent 18 months pursuing. Every time Dan reached for something, Carlos seemed to already have it. And now Carlos had his hand on the small of Kate's back, guiding her through the restaurant like she was precious cargo. "Danny?" Jennifer's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Danny, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Dan couldn't respond. He couldn't breathe. Carlos leaned down to whisper something in Kate's ear. Kate smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile Dan was used to seeing, but a genuine smile that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. Pierre was leading them to a table. Not just any table. The table directly across from Dan's. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. Some fever dream brought on by stress and expensive wine. But then Kate looked up. Her eyes met Dan's across the restaurant, and she smiled. Not at Dan. Through him. As if he were furniture. As if he were nothing. Then she turned back to Carlos, laughed at something he said, and allowed him to pull out her chair. Dan's grip on his wine glass tightened so hard that the stem cracked. Jennifer followed his gaze, her perfectly threaded brows furrowing. "Wait, isn't that—" Her eyes widened. "Danny, is that your wife? With Carlos Medina?" Dan didn't answer. He couldn't. His wife, his boring, invisible, beneath-him wife, was on a date with the one man who had the power to destroy everything Dan had built. And from the way Carlos was looking at her, this wasn't a business dinner. "Oh my God," Jennifer breathed, a hint of something, excitement, schadenfreude, creeping into her voice. "This is insane. Are they together?" Dan's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know? She's your wife." "I said I don't know," Dan hissed, louder than he intended. A few heads turned. He forced himself to lower his voice. "She was at home when I left. She didn't say anything about going out." "Well, she's definitely out now." Jennifer leaned back, studying Kate with new interest. "And she looks amazing. Is that Valentino? I wanted that dress, but it was sold out everywhere." Dan barely heard her. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Kate didn't know Carlos. Kate didn't know anyone except the vapid housewives in their building and her college friends who she barely spoke to anymore. Kate's world was small. Dan had made sure of that. So how was she sitting in the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, looking like a movie star, laughing with a man who controlled more wealth than some countries? Carlos signaled for a sommelier. He ordered without looking at the menu, clearly irregular. The sommelier bowed slightly and hurried off. Kate said something that made Carlos throw his head back and laugh. A real laugh. The kind of laugh that meant she had surprised him. Dan had never seen Carlos Medina laugh. Should we leave?" Jennifer asked, her voice uncertain now. "This is weird. It's really weird, Danny." "We're not leaving." Dan's voice came out harder than he intended. "We're staying, and we're going to act like everything is normal." "Normal? Your wife is—" "I know what she is." Dan grabbed his wine, downing half of it in one gulp. "Just let me think." But thinking was impossible. Every few seconds his eyes were drawn back to that table. To Kate, radiant and unfamiliar. To Carlos, attentive and clearly captivated. to the nightmare unfolding in real time. To understand this night, we need to go back 2 weeks. Kate had known about Jennifer for 6 months. She wasn't stupid. The late nights, the investor dinners that happened 3 times a week, the receipts she found in Dan's jacket for jewelry she never received, the way his phone was always face down, always locked, always buzzing with notifications he ignored when she was around. For the first 5 months, she had done nothing. She had cried in the shower where Dan couldn't hear. She had stared at her wedding ring and wondered where the man she married had gone. She had told herself it was a phase, that he would come back to her, that the life they had built meant something. But then came the conversation she was never meant to hear. 2 weeks ago, Dan had been in his home office with the door closed. Kate had been walking to the kitchen when she heard his voice. Not his business voice, but the soft, intimate voice she hadn't heard directed at her in years. "I know it's hard, baby, but she's practically invisible. She won't fight back. She doesn't have the spine for it." Kate had frozen outside the door. "The prenup is airtight. She gets the apartment, some cash, and that's it. She signed it without even reading it properly. Can you believe that? She trusted me." Dan's laugh was cruel. "By this time next year, you'll be living in that penthouse. We'll redecorate, obviously." Her taste is pathetic. Kate's hand had found the wall for support. "You're worth everything, Jen." Kate was always just a placeholder. "Something to keep my mother happy until I found someone worthy." "You're worthy. You're going to be the face of the Whitfield brand. The woman everyone envies." That was when Kate stopped crying. That was when something inside her shifted. The grief calcified into something colder, something sharper. She wasn't a placeholder. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't spineless. She had just been playing the role Dan had written for her. It was time to write her own script. The next morning, Dan left early for the office. Kate waited until his car disappeared down the street before she walked into his study. She had never been in his study when he wasn't home. It was his sanctuary, he said. His war room. Spouses didn't belong in war rooms. She opened his desk drawer. She found what she was looking for within minutes. A second phone. The one he used to text Jennifer. The one filled with messages that would make any divorce lawyer salivate. But Kate wasn't interested in divorce. Not yet. Not the way Dan expected. She photographed everything. Screenshots of conversations, evidence of gifts purchased with marital funds, plans they had made, vacations they had booked, promises of a future that treated Kate like a corpse that just hadn't stopped breathing yet. Then she put the phone back exactly as she found it. That evening, she made a call she hadn't made in 4 years. "Catherine?" The voice on the other end was warm, surprised. "Is that really you?" "Hi, Aunt Vivian," Kate said. "I need your help." Vivian Chen wasn't really Kate's aunt. She was her godmother, her mother's best friend from childhood, and the woman who had raised Kate after her parents died in a car accident when Kate was 17. She was also the founder and CEO of Chen Capital, one of the most powerful investment firms on the East Coast. When Kate had married Dan 4 years ago, Vivian had been skeptical. She had seen something predatory in Dan's charm, something hollow behind his smile. But Kate had been in love, and Vivian had respected her choice. "I haven't heard from you in 2 years, sweetheart," Vivian said carefully. "Dan always said you were too busy." "Dan said a lot of things." Kate's voice was steady. "I believed most of them. I'm not going to make that mistake again." There was a pause, then, "What do you need?" "I need to remember who I am," Kate said, "and I need to remind Dan exactly what he threw away." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Come to my office tomorrow. We have a lot to discuss." What Kate learned over the next 2 weeks would have destroyed a weaker woman. Sitting in Vivian's corner office overlooking the Hudson, Kate discovered that Dan's empire was built on sand. "He's leveraged to his eyeballs," Vivian explained, spreading financial documents across her desk. "Whitfield Technologies looks impressive on paper, but he's taken on massive debt to fund expansion. He's betting everything on a government contract that's supposed to be announced next month." "What government contract?" "Defense Department. AI-powered security systems. Worth $800 million over 5 years. Dan's been positioning his company as the front runner for 2 years." Kate studied the documents. She understood them. She had been a finance major after all, even if Dan had spent 4 years making her forget it. What happens if he doesn't get the contract? His company folds within 18 months. His investors pull out. His creditors call in their debts. Vivian leaned back. He's not as secure as he pretends to be, Catherine. His entire persona is built on confidence. The moment people doubt him, the whole thing crumbles. Kate absorbed this. Who else is bidding for the contract? Vivian's lips curved into a small smile. Now that's the interesting question. The main competitor is Medina Technologies. Carlos Medina. Kate knew the name. Dan complained about Carlos constantly. The man who always seemed to be one step ahead. The man Dan blamed for every setback. Tell me about him, Kate said. Carlos Medina is everything Dan pretends to be. Self-made, brilliant, ethical. Vivian pulled up a profile on her computer. He grew up in El Paso, son of immigrants who ran a small electronics repair shop. Got a full scholarship to MIT, founded his first company in his dorm room, sold it for $200 million at 24. His current company is valued at $28 billion. But unlike Dan, he's not drowning in debt. He owns 62% outright. Kate studied the photo on the screen. Dark hair, serious eyes, a face that suggested depth rather than flash. He's also single, Vivian added with a knowing glance. Very single. The tech press calls him a workaholic. He hasn't been photographed with a woman in over 3 years. I'm not looking for a rebound. I'm not suggesting you are. Vivian closed her laptop. But I am suggesting that Dan's greatest fear isn't losing his wife. It's losing to Carlos Medina. If you really want to remind Dan what he threw away, there's no better mirror than the man he'll never be. Kate was quiet for a long moment. How would I even meet him? Vivian smiled. Chen Capital is co-hosting a charity gala next Friday. The guest list includes every major player in tech, including Carlos. I could introduce you. As who? Dan's wife? As Catherine Chen, my goddaughter, the woman who graduated top of her class from Wharton before she disappeared into a penthouse and forgot her own name. Kate felt something stir in her chest, something that had been dormant for 4 years. I don't have anything to wear, she said, and even as the words left her mouth, she knew how ridiculous they sounded. Vivian laughed. Sweetheart, you're about to meet the most powerful people in New York. Trust me, we're going to make sure you look the part. The Hartley Foundation Gala was held in the Grand Ballroom of the St. Regis, a glittering affair where champagne flowed like water, and the combined net worth of the guests exceeded the GDP of several small nations. Kate arrived on Vivian's arm, barely recognizing herself. The stylist had spent 6 hours on her transformation. Her hair, usually limp and neglected, had been cut and colored into soft, honey blonde waves. Her makeup was subtle but strategic, emphasizing her cheekbones and the green of her eyes. Her dress was a midnight blue Oscar de la Renta that made her feel like royalty. But the biggest change wasn't external. It was the way she held herself, the way she had practiced walking in front of Vivian's mirror until the hesitation in her step disappeared, the way she had rehearsed conversation until her voice stopped trembling. She wasn't Kate Whitfield tonight. She was Catherine Chen, and Catherine Chen was not invisible. There he is, Vivian murmured, nodding toward a group near the bar. The one in the charcoal jacket. Don't stare. Kate's eyes found Carlos Medina. He was taller than she expected, with broad shoulders and the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. He was listening to a silver-haired man talk, his expression attentive but reserved. He looks serious, Kate observed. He is serious. That's why the tech press doesn't know what to do with him. He's not interested in being a celebrity. He just wants to build things that matter. Vivian squeezed Kate's arm. Go get a drink at the bar. I'll engineer an introduction. Kate's heart was pounding as she approached the bar. She ordered a gin and tonic, something sophisticated, something she hadn't drunk since college, and tried to look casual as she sipped it. She didn't have to wait long. Catherine, Vivian's voice came from behind her. I'd like you to meet someone. This is Carlos Medina, founder of Medina Technologies. Carlos, this is my goddaughter, Catherine Chen. She was one of the most promising minds in finance before she took a sabbatical. Carlos turned to face her. Up close, his eyes were darker than she expected, intelligent and searching. Catherine, he said, extending his hand, His grip was firm but not aggressive. Your godmother speaks very highly of you. She's biased, Kate said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. But I'll take it. Carlos's lips twitched, almost a smile. Sabbatical, she said. What field? Investment analysis. I was going to be the next Oracle of Wall Street. Kate took a sip of her drink. Then I got married. My husband had other plans for my career. She hadn't meant to say that. The words just slipped out, raw and honest. Carlos's expression shifted. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. I know something about that, he said quietly. People who try to make you smaller than you are. How do you handle it? I outgrow them. His gaze was direct, unflinching. And then I forget their names. Kate felt a spark, something electric and dangerous. That sounds very satisfying. It is. Carlos glanced at his watch. Listen, I have to make the rounds. My PR person will have my head if I hide by the bar all night. But I'd like to continue this conversation. Are you free for dinner this week? Kate's breath caught. This was happening too fast. She had a husband. She was here for revenge, not romance. But looking into Carlos's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. She saw herself, not as Dan's wife, not as a placeholder, as a person worth knowing. I'm free Thursday, she heard herself say. Carlos smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. Thursday it is. I know a place. As he walked away, Vivian appeared at Kate's elbow, her expression triumphant. And that, my dear, is how it's done. Kate watched Carlos disappear into the crowd, her heart racing. She had come here to make Dan jealous, to remind him what he had taken for granted. But standing in that ballroom, wearing a dress that cost more than her monthly allowance, she realized something profound. This wasn't about Dan anymore. This was about her. Now we return to La Lumiere, to the table where Dan sat frozen, watching his wife laugh with his nemesis. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of discovery for Kate. 3 dinners with Carlos had revealed a man utterly unlike Dan. Thoughtful, curious, genuinely interested in what she had to say. He asked about her ideas, her dreams, the career she had abandoned. He listened when she spoke. He remembered details from previous conversations. He treated her like she mattered. And now, by complete coincidence, or perhaps fate's cruel sense of humor, they had chosen the same restaurant, the same night as Dan and his mistress. Kate had seen Dan the moment she walked in. She had seen Jennifer too, in her cheap-looking silver dress, leaning across the table with desperate hunger. And she had made a choice. She would not hide. She would not run. She would sit directly in Dan's eyeline and let him see exactly what he had lost. You're quiet, Carlos observed, studying her across the table. Everything okay? Kate considered lying, but she had spent 4 years lying. To Dan, to herself, to everyone. My husband is here, she said simply. Corner table. The blonde with him is his mistress. Carlos didn't turn around. His expression didn't change. He simply reached across the table and took her hand. Do you want to leave? No. Kate's voice was firm. I want to stay. I want him to see that I'm not the woman he thinks I am. Carlos squeezed her hand gently. For what it's worth, I never thought you were. The woman Dan describes, the quiet mouse, the boring housewife, that's not who I've been having dinner with for 2 weeks. That's a fiction he created to make himself feel superior. How do you know what Dan says about me? We move in the same circles. He talks. Carlos's jaw tightened slightly. He brags about keeping you in your place. He jokes about how easy you are to manage. I always thought he was a fool. Now I know I was right. Kate felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, from something else. From being seen, from being defended. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. Just be yourself. Carlos raised his glass. To new chapters. Kate clinked her glass against his. To new chapters. Across the restaurant, Dan watched this exchange with mounting fury. Danny, you're staring. Jennifer's voice had lost its playful edge. She was nervous now, her eyes darting between Dan and Kate's table. It's weird. People are noticing. Let them notice. Dan couldn't look away. Carlos was leaning toward Kate, saying something that made her smile. That smile. Dan hadn't seen that smile in years. He had almost forgotten she was capable of it. "What are they even talking about?" Jennifer demanded. "She's a housewife. What could she possibly have to say to Carlos Medina?" Dan didn't know. That was the problem. He didn't know anything about Kate anymore. He didn't know what she thought about, what she dreamed about, what she wanted from life. He had stopped asking years ago. He had assumed she had nothing to say. The sommelier approached Carlos's table with a bottle of wine. Dan recognized the label even from across the room. Chateau Margaux, 1995. A bottle worth at least $200. Carlos tasted it, nodded approval, and the sommelier filled both glasses. Kate lifted hers with the easy grace of someone who belonged in places like this. When had she learned to do that? When had she become this woman? "I need to talk to her," Dan announced, pushing back from the table. Jennifer grabbed his arm. "What? No, you can't just walk over there. She's my wife. She's on a date with another man. In public. If you make a scene, it'll be all over page 6 by morning." Dan hesitated. She was right. La Lumiere was crawling with socialites and journalists. One wrong move and his reputation would be shredded. But watching Kate laugh with Carlos was making him physically ill. "Fine," he hissed, sitting back down. "Fine, we'll wait." "Wait for what?" "For her to come to the restroom. Or to leave. I'll catch her alone." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "Why do you care so much? I thought she meant nothing to you." "She doesn't," Dan said automatically. "But Carlos Medina does. He's trying to humiliate me. That's what this is. He found out about us and he's using Kate to get under my skin. Or maybe," Jennifer's voice turned acidic, "maybe he just likes her." Dan's head snapped toward her. "What?" "You heard me." Jennifer drained her champagne. "Maybe the great Carlos Medina looked at your boring housewife and saw something you missed. Wouldn't that be embarrassing?" "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Jennifer leaned forward. "Look at her, Dan. Really look. She's stunning tonight. That dress costs more than my car. Her jewelry is real, not that cubic zirconia crap you buy me and pretend is diamond." Dan's jaw dropped. "I've never—" "Please. I know fake when I see it." Jennifer's mask was slipping now, revealing the calculating woman underneath. "I've been patient, Danny. I've been waiting for you to leave her. But if she leaves you first, if she walks out with Carlos freaking Medina while I'm stuck being your dirty little secret, that's not going to happen. Then do something about it." Jennifer's eyes were hard. "Because right now your wife is winning, and I didn't sign up to be on the losing team." Dan stared at her. In this light, with her face twisted in frustration, Jennifer looked almost ugly. He had never noticed before. Kate excused herself after the main course. The ladies' room at La Lumiere was as opulent as the rest of the restaurant. Marble counters, fresh flowers, a dedicated attendant who offered hand towels and mints. Kate stood at the mirror, touching up her lipstick, when she heard the door open. She expected another woman. She got Dan. "Catherine?" He said her full name. He never said her full name. Kate finished applying her lipstick before she turned around. "Dan, you're in the women's restroom. I need to talk to you." "So you followed me to the bathroom like a stalker?" Kate dropped the lipstick in her clutch. Very dignified. "What the hell are you doing here?" Dan's voice was low, dangerous. "With him? Having dinner. Unlike you, Carlos actually invites me to nice restaurants." "Don't play games with me, Kate. I know what this is. You found out about Jennifer and you're trying to make me jealous." Kate laughed. The sound surprised both of them. "Jealous?" She shook her head. "Dan, I've known about Jennifer for 6 months. I've heard you on the phone with her. I found the receipts for the jewelry, the hotels, the little gifts. I know everything." Dan's face went pale. You know, I know you call me invisible. I know you call me a placeholder. I know you've been planning to divorce me and give me nothing." Kate stepped closer, and something in her expression made Dan step back. "I know everything, Dan. I've just been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For tonight." Kate smiled. It was not a warm smile. "For you to see me with Carlos Medina in front of everyone you're trying to impress. For you to realize that the woman you threw away is worth 10 of your pathetic little influencer. Kate, my name is Catherine. Her voice cut like glass. And this conversation is over. She moved toward the door. Dan grabbed her arm. You can't do this to me. His grip was tight, bordering on painful. I won't let you humiliate me. I'll destroy you in the divorce. I'll take everything. Kate looked down at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at his face. Let go of me, she said quietly, or I'll scream. And then everyone at La Lumiere will see exactly what kind of man you are. Dan's grip tightened for a moment. Then slowly, he released her. This isn't over, he hissed. You're right. Kate straightened her dress. It's just beginning. She walked out of the restroom, leaving Dan standing alone under the harsh, fluorescent lights. Kate returned to her table, her heart pounding, but her face serene. Carlos looked up as she approached. His eyes searched her face. Everything okay? Dan followed me to the restroom. Carlos's expression hardened. Did he touch you? Grab my arm, I handled it. For a moment, Carlos looked like he wanted to stand up and walk over to Dan's table. His hands were clenched on the tablecloth. Carlos, Kate said softly, don't. That's what he wants. A scene. Carlos took a deep breath, then another. Slowly, the tension left his shoulders. You're right. He unclenched his hands. But I want you to know something. If he ever touches you again, there won't be a scene. There will be consequences. Kate believed him. Let's not give him any more attention, she said. Tell me about the contract. Vivian mentioned you're bidding on the same defense project as Dan. Carlos's eyebrows rose. You know about that? I know a lot of things. Kate picked up her wine. My husband thinks I'm stupid because I let him think that. But I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. I used to analyze defense contracts for fun. A slow smile spread across Carlos's face. Is that so? It is. Kate leaned forward. Tell me about your proposal. I might have some thoughts. For the next hour, they talked strategy. Kate's mind came alive in ways it hadn't in years, analyzing numbers, identifying weaknesses, suggesting approaches Dan had never considered because he never considered her capable of considering anything. Carlos listened with growing respect. You're remarkable, he said finally. Why did you hide this for so long? Kate looked across the restaurant at Dan, who was drinking heavily now, while Jennifer sulked across from him. Because he made me believe I was nothing, she said, and I was foolish enough to believe him. That's over now. Kate met Carlos's eyes. Yes, it is. When Carlos and Kate rose to leave, the restaurant fell silent again. This time Kate didn't avoid Dan's gaze. She held it as she walked past his table, her hand in Carlos's, her head high. Kate! Dan's voice was loud, desperate. Kate, wait! She stopped. The entire restaurant was watching now. What is it, Dan? He stood up, nearly knocking over his wine glass. We need to talk. Come home. We can work this out. Work what out? Kate's voice was perfectly calm. Your affair? Your plans to leave me with nothing? Your years of telling me I was worthless? Gas rippled through the restaurant. Jennifer stood up, her face flushed. Dan, let's just go. Shut up, Jennifer. Dan didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on Kate. Kate, please. I made mistakes. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll end things with her. Her has a name, Jennifer snapped. And I'm standing right here. Dan ignored her completely. Kate, please. I'm asking you. Kate studied her husband, the man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed her career for, the man who had spent 4 years making her feel like a ghost in her own life. No, she said simply. No. No, I'm not coming home. I'm not working anything out. I'm done, Dan. Kate glanced at Jennifer. She can have you, the apartment, the debt you've hidden from everyone, the failing company that's one bad quarter away from bankruptcy. Dan's face went white. How do you? I told you, I'm not stupid. Kate turned to Carlos. Ready? Whenever you are. They walked out of La Lumiere together, leaving chaos in their wake. Dan stood frozen, surrounded by whispers and stares. Jennifer grabbed her purse. I'm leaving, she announced. Don't call me. Jen, wait! You're broke? Jennifer's voice was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. You're actually broke? Oh my God! I wasted 8 months on you. She stormed out, leaving Dan completely alone. The whispers grew louder. Phones appeared. Photos were taken. By morning, Dan Whitfield wouldn't just be humiliated. He would be finished. Dan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse in the dark, drinking scotch and watching his phone blow up with notifications. The photos from La Lumiere were everywhere. Tech Twitter was having a field day. Whitfield's wife spotted with rival Medina, read one headline. Trouble in paradise for Tech's biggest ego? Asked another. His investors were calling. His board members were texting. His PR team was in full panic mode. But none of that compared to the email that arrived at 6 a.m. It was from Kate's lawyer, a name partner at one of the most aggressive family law firms in New York. The message was brief. Please find attached a petition for divorce on behalf of Catherine Whitfield, née Chen. We will be seeking equitable distribution of all marital assets, including Mr. Whitfield's shares in Whitfield Technologies. We are also in possession of evidence regarding Mr. Whitfield's extramarital affair, which may be relevant to proceedings. A hearing date will be scheduled within 30 days. Dan read it 3 times. Equitable distribution. That meant Kate was going after his company, his shares, everything he had built, and the evidence. God, what evidence did she have? How much had she seen? How much had she documented? His phone rang, his mother. Daniel, her voice was ice. I'm watching the news. Please tell me there's been some misunderstanding. Mom, please tell me my son didn't cheat on his wife with some Instagram girl. Please tell me you didn't drive Catherine, sweet, patient Catherine, into the arms of another man. It's complicated. It's not complicated, Daniel. It's simple. You had a good woman and you destroyed her. Just like your father destroyed me. Her voice cracked. I thought I raised you better than this. The line went dead. Dan stared at the phone. His mother had never hung up on him before. The penthouse felt enormous, empty. The silence that Kate had always filled, with her quiet presence, her careful attention to their home, her attempts to connect with him, was deafening now. He walked into the kitchen. There was a note on the refrigerator, written in Kate's handwriting. He had never noticed it before. Gone to yoga. Dinner's in the fridge. I love you. The date was from 3 days ago. She had still been writing him love notes, even after everything. Dan crumpled the note in his fist and finally, for the first time in years, began to cry. 3 weeks later, the Department of Defense announced their decision. The $800 million contract, the one Dan had been counting on, the one that was supposed to save his company, went to Medina Technologies. Dan watched the press conference from his home office. Carlos stood at the podium, flanked by generals and politicians, looking every inch the visionary leader. This contract represents a new era in defense technology, Carlos said, his voice steady and confident. But more importantly, it represents a commitment to doing things the right way. Medina Technologies was built on a simple principle, that innovation and integrity can coexist. We're honored to prove that principle on the largest stage possible. The reporters applauded. The generals shook Carlos's hand. Dan turned off the television. His phone buzzed. A text from his CFO. We need to talk. The board is calling an emergency meeting. The emergency meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, Dan was no longer CEO of Whitfield Technologies. The board cited loss of investor confidence and reputational damage. They gave him a severance package that would have seemed generous a year ago, but now felt like pocket change compared to what he had lost. As he packed up his office, the corner office with the view of Central Park, the office he had dreamed about since business school, Dan's phone buzzed with one last notification. A news alert. Tech power couple? Carlos Medina and mystery woman spotted at charity gala. The photo showed Carlos and Kate arm in arm, smiling at each other with obvious affection. Kate was wearing white. She looked radiant. Dan threw his phone against the wall. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Kate's lawyers were relentless. They had documented everything. The affair, the hidden accounts, the gifts purchased with marital funds. They had text messages, emails, hotel receipts. They had testimony from Jennifer, who had turned on Dan the moment she realized his money was gone. Dan's prenup, the one he had been so proud of, turned out to have a fatal flaw. His lawyer had included a standard infidelity clause that Dan had never bothered to read. If either party committed adultery, The other was entitled to 50% of all assets acquired during the marriage. Kate was entitled to half of everything, but she didn't take it. On the day of the final hearing, Kate's lawyer made an unexpected announcement. Your Honor, my client wishes to propose an alternative settlement. Rather than seeking 50% of Mr. Whitfield's assets, which would effectively destroy his remaining business interests, Mrs. Whitfield is prepared to accept a lump sum of $5 million and relinquish all other claims. The judge looked surprised. Dan's lawyer looked stunned. Dan himself couldn't process what he was hearing. Mrs. Whitfield, the judge said, you understand that you're entitled to significantly more than this? Kate stood. She was wearing a simple gray dress, no jewelry, her hair pulled back in the ponytail Dan remembered from their early days. I understand, Your Honor, but I'm not interested in destroying my ex-husband. I just want to move on with my life. She glanced at Dan. For a moment, something soft flickered in her eyes. A ghost of the woman who had loved him. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, Dan, she said quietly. I really do. The judge approved the settlement. The marriage was officially dissolved. Kate walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Dan sat in his chair for a long time after everyone else had left, trying to understand what had just happened. She had him. She could have destroyed him completely, and she had chosen mercy. It was the cruelest thing she could have done. The Grand Hyatt Ballroom was packed for the Women in Tech Leadership Summit. Dan stood in the back, wearing a name tag that read, Daniel Whitfield, Independent Consultant. It was a generous description for what he actually did, which was mostly advise small startups who couldn't afford anyone better. He had rebuilt slowly. The $5 million Kate had left him was enough to start over, not enough to start over well. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Jersey City now. He drove a Honda. He had learned to cook his own meals. The humiliation had faded into something more manageable, a dull ache rather than a sharp pain. He no longer checked Kate's social media obsessively. He no longer searched Carlos's name to see if they were still together. But tonight, he was here because his therapist had suggested he re-engage with his industry, face his fears, move forward. He hadn't expected Kate to be the keynote speaker. She walked onto the stage in a cream-colored suit, her hair shorter now, her presence commanding in a way it never had been during their marriage. Good evening, she said, her voice amplified but warm. My name is Catherine Chen, and 3 years ago, I was invisible. A murmur went through the crowd. Dan felt his throat tighten. I spent 4 years of my life believing that I was worthless, that my only value was as an accessory to a powerful man, that my education, my intelligence, my ambitions, none of it mattered because someone I loved told me it didn't. Kate paused, surveying the audience. But here's what I learned. The people who try to make you small are never as big as they pretend to be. And the moment you stop believing their lies, the moment you remember who you are, everything changes. She clicked to a new slide. A photo of herself at the Wharton graduation, young and hopeful. This was me at 22 before I forgot my own name. And this, she clicked again, showing a photo of herself at a construction site, hard hat on, blueprints in hand, is me today, CEO of Chen Medina Ventures, a firm dedicated to funding women-led startups in emerging markets. The audience applauded. Dan noticed the name. Chen Medina. Kate smiled. Yes, my husband and I worked together. And before you ask, no, it wasn't love at first sight. It was respect at first conversation, which in my experience is much more valuable. Husband. Dan's heart clenched. He had known intellectually that Kate and Carlos had married. He had seen the announcement in the Times, the photos from their Tuscan wedding, the interviews about their modern partnership. But hearing her say it, casually and happily in front of hundreds of people, that was different. I want to leave you with one thought, Kate continued. You are not who other people say you are. You are not your worst moment, your biggest failure, or the lies someone told you to keep you under their control. You are the person you choose to be every single day. She looked out at the audience. For a moment, her eyes seemed to find Dan in the back of the room. He couldn't tell if she recognized him. He couldn't tell if it mattered. Choose wisely, Kate said. Thank you. The applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet. Dan remained seated, unable to move. After the speech, he watched Kate descend from the stage into a crowd of admirers. He watched Carlos appear at her side, placing a protective hand on her back, exactly as he had that night at La Lumiere. He watched them leave together, laughing about something, completely absorbed in each other. Dan stood up. He walked to the exit. Outside, the city was alive with lights and noise. People rushed past him, busy with their own lives, their own dramas. Dan thought about the man he had been 3 years ago, the man who had called his wife invisible, the man who had thrown away a diamond because he wanted something shinier. That man had been a fool. Dan hailed a cab. He gave the driver his address in Jersey City. The city disappeared behind him, tower by tower, light by light. He had lost the empire. He had lost the wife. He had lost the future he thought he deserved. But sitting in that cab, watching the skyline fade, Dan realized something. He had also lost the arrogance, the cruelty, the desperate need to be the most important person in every room. Maybe that was enough. Maybe losing everything was the only way to find out what actually mattered. The cab crossed into New Jersey. Dan closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would wake up in his small apartment. He would make his own coffee. He would call clients who didn't know or care about his former glory. And somewhere in Manhattan, Kate would wake up beside a man who deserved her, in a life she had built with her own 2 hands. That was karma, not a punishment, not a victory, just the natural consequence of every choice they had ever made, playing out to its inevitable end. And that, my friends, is how a billionaire lost everything over dinner. Not because of a bad deal, not because of market conditions, not because of anything except his own blindness. Dan Whitfield spent 4 years treating his wife like furniture. He told her she was boring. He told her she was worthless. He told her that the only value she had was the value he gave her. And then he watched her walk away with the one man he could never defeat. The cruelest part? Kate didn't destroy him. She could have. She had every right, every legal ground, every moral justification. But she chose mercy instead. Because in the end, Kate understood something Dan never did. The best revenge isn't ruining someone. It's outgrowing them so completely that they become a stranger. It's building a life so full, so beautiful, so authentic that the past becomes a country you no longer visit. Dan learned the hard way that the woman he called invisible was the only one who ever really saw him. And by the time he realized it, she had already found someone who saw her too. So here's my question for you. Do you think Kate was right to show Dan mercy, or should she have taken everything? And what about Carlos? Do you believe he was genuinely interested in Kate, or was this partly about defeating his rival? Most importantly, if you were in Kate's position, 4 years into a marriage with a man who treated you like nothing, would you have had the courage to walk away? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something, made you think, made you remember someone who once made you feel invisible, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and trust me, there are people out there who need to hear this. Subscribe if you haven't already and hit that notification bell. We post new stories every week, tales of karma, justice, and the incredible resilience of people who refuse to stay small. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, be careful how you treat people on your way up, because one day you might find yourself serving them dinner. Until next time.